this is going well for you. Do you have questions? Please email me or get on Skype if you need to. And let's run quickly. Again, we're going to be working on this one here, the Climbers Chapter 2, Varieties of English. Remember, there is a PDF that you can download, and there's also the podcast that you can listen to. Hopefully, you'll be listening to this one right now. And let's run over to the lesson we're going to be looking at here, which is Varieties of English. This is Chapter 2 out of your textbook, which is Analyzing English Grammar. I'm on page 19 here to begin with. Varieties of English. We're talking about regional dialects, social dialects, standard American English styles, SLA, and English in an international context. If you do have questions, again, please send me an email. All right, let's begin here with the first thing here, which is what we call dialects. And what is a dialect? What makes a dialect? And let's begin here. Dialect is a variant of a language spoken by a group of people sharing a common time or space component. It's actually kind of hard to define what a dialect is because of the nature of languages and whether it's the pronunciation of it makes it a dialect, or how far do we do that makes it a dialect, or is it just a different way of saying something? In any event, a dialect is a variant, and it's varied by time or location or social ladder, or you can even have your own, which would be called an idiolect. You see, we're all speaking a variant of English today because we are all living at a certain time of the year. A certain time of the year. A certain time. 100 years ago, we would have used different words. We may have had different pronunciation. So time is a factor. Space and location is a factor. The people who left England years ago, they had a certain dialect, and they move and they go to a further location. They come to the U.S., they go to Canada, they go to India or Australia, and their accent changes because of the location that they're at. So the distance between them caused the dialect to increase. So time could be a factor, space can be a factor, the location, and also the social community. You go to New York City, for example, and you find a variety of different places, and in each place you'll have different dialects, and also in regard to social ladder. Those who are more affluent are going to have a certain dialect that they're using. Those are the lower dialect, and of course, in different cultural groups as well, you'll have different dialects. And of course, you could have something called an idiolect, which is a personal dialect, an idiolect. In my family, when one wants to go to the bathroom, we often say, I need to go talk to my aunt. And don't ask me why that happened, but it did. And nobody understands that unless, of course, they know my idiolect. It's not necessarily a dialect, but it is a special way of saying things in my family. So dialects can vary in all of those different ways. Okay? Let's write on it. Okay. We also have regional dialects. It's very interesting that in certain areas of the country, there are certain ways of saying things. Certain ways of saying vowels, certain ways of saying certain types of vocabulary, certain ways of saying, certain ways of speed and how fast you talk. I don't know about you, but when you live up here in New York, you tend to talk kind of fast. You try to get your words out there very quickly. When you're from some other places in the country, you might talk a little more slowly. In fact, there are places in the country where the mainstream media will think these people aren't so bright because of the way they talk. They're not so bright. Completely wrong, but it's just the impression that's made in the media. We have different vocabulary. We have the word Coke. What does Coke mean? Well, for some people, Coke is a type of type of soft drink, type of carbonated drink, Coca-Cola. In other parts of the country, Coke means soft drink. So you go to certain parts of the country and you say, "Yeah, I'd like a Coke," and they'd say, "Okay, what kind?" It would be different, or what we are doing. Other parts of the country, we have different words for the word submarine sandwich. Since being living in the New York area, it's the first time I've heard someone say it's a hero sandwich, which again I did not heard of before. Other parts of the country, it's called a hoagie, or it's called a grinder. Again, these are things you might want to know. You want to make sure that you write these down in your notes when you do. It's called a hoagie. It's called a grinder. It's called a sub. It's called a submarine sandwich. Um, you can look at your driveway where you park your car, right? For those of you who have driveways. Some people call it a driveway. Some people call it a car park. Um, some people call it, I forget the other name was. You've got the word highway. But a highway can also be a freeway, it can be a turnpike, it can be a parkway, depending on where you are in the country. Highways out in California aren't called highways, they're called freeways, for example. You've got different ways of pronouncing vowels, okay, up in Boston, for example, or I should say up in Boston. You have different ways of pronouncing things. Pennsylvania, where I'm from, the Pennsylvania Dutch, have a different way of pronouncing things and the vowels that they use. The interesting thing about these regional dialects is that as you travel west, the number of dialects decreases. For some reason, and there is reason for it, and you want to take a dialectology course, you can do that. But in the eastern part of the country, there are a lot more dialects over here. In fact, if you go to if you go to cities like Philadelphia, there are actually dialects within the city. There are different parts of the city that have different dialects that are somewhat discernible. So you'll note that in the eastern part of the country, there are a lot of dialects, and then you've got different types of dialects in the north and in the south. But as you travel west, you find fewer and fewer dialects. For some reason, as you traveled west, you began to meld more together. Okay, it is an interesting thing. Exactly why that happens, we don't know, but it does. If you're looking at the dialects in England as well, you'll find that in certain places there are a lot more dialects than in others. The city of London itself, again, has many dialects. So the dialects became leveled; they began to relax more as we traveled west. In addition to having dialects based on location, you've got social dialects. You've got something called Appalachian English, and I can't give you any examples here, but it's a style of English that is used in the Appalachian Mountains, and oh, used in this region, right? Or at least parts of those regions, the Appalachian Mountains, and so that's a dialect based on your social status and also in the location. You also have something called Black English Vernacular, and these are just examples of social dialects. Black English Vernacular, which was actually popular a while ago, is a type of English that's used in certain communities within some major cities. Page 25. The economic advantages of embracing the mainstream urban dialect culture is counterbalanced by a sense of human loss. And what he is trying to say here is that when one gives up standard English, when someone embraces standard English as opposed to keeping the dialect that they have, they lose something. They lose some of that sense of identity and who they are. And you'll notice that if you have have an accent because of your hometown, and you go to a new place and you feel uncomfortable because of your accent in that new place, that you begin to try to change, and in a sense, you lose some of your cultural identity. I've spoken to many people who they come from Kentucky and they move to Maryland, and so then they want to change. They want to lose that accent. Or people who come from England and they come to New York and they want to change their accent because of where they come from. It does happen, and generally speaking, people do that to fit in, or generally speaking, people do that to uh, keep a job or get a good job. But at the same time, they're losing some of that identity of their culture. Let's move on, and we have Standard American English. Standard American English is also called Broadcast English. Um, it's the standard language that's used in broadcasting. For some reason, which is probably radio is the cause, that Standard American English happened somewhere in this area. And so it's in the upper Midwest where you have quote unquote standard American English. Radio was the main reason for that. Radio announcers were broadcasting, and they were broadcasting from large cities like Chicago. And so that dialect became the standard. You look at people today who are on news or on TV, if they're using standard English, in many cases it's what's considered Midwestern Standard English. Now, spoken English changes much more rapidly because it's not written down, it's not codified. Written English is less volatile. Therefore, when you see things that are written down, the chances are, the likelihood is that they're going to be stay that way for a longer period of time. There are shifts, though, in style with language, and in Standard American English, the accents can change in their style depending on how close they are to Standard English. I'm sorry, to academic English, or how far they are away from it. um, so there may be some type of shifting with a speaker because they're getting closer to Standard English. Now, you have some people who are very zealous in trying to what's the word here? Very zealous in trying to be correct. They might have hyper correction. They try to take a rule of language and use it everywhere. They overuse it, and so they cause problems because of doing that. And there are some examples in the text, people who try to use nominative cases for objective cases, and the like. Kids often have this problem, like I said before in an earlier lecture when I was used the word when I used the idea of ed at the end of a verb. He played, he talked with me, and then you say, well, he teached me. Well, no, I'm taking a rule and I'm overusing it. That's that hypercorrection that they're talking about. We have standard English. Oftentimes it's equated with broadcast English. Spoken English is more volatile than written, and you are going to have style changes. Can't be helped. Some of the styles that someone might consider would be a casual form of speech or a more formal type of speech. Think about when you speak with your friends. What style of English are you using when you speak to them? It's probably going to be different than this style of English you use when you speak to a professor, or when you speak to the president of the college, or if you speak to a congressman or someone that you know that's famous. Your language might change. And so there's just different styles of language. When you speak to your kids, or you speak, not your kids, when you speak to your children, your kids in school, or when you speak to someone who's younger than you, and how do you speak to them differently than you would speak to someone older than you, like your parents or your grandparents. There's different styles of language. There is an implied rule here in the School of Ed that when you speak to your professors, you call them by their title, their given title. For example, I would be Dr. Toozy or Dr. White, or and that when you talk to your friends, you don't talk to them with a title. You talk to them with their first name or whatever. The style changes, and there are a variety of styles that you have when you speak. Now, English has also a variety in the sense of someone learning a second language. They're going to have a variety of languages in their head. Again, when you're learning language, you have to have all these rules, if you recall from chapter 1. Now, we have all these rules in our head, but for a second language learner, they've got rules in their head, and the rules are wrong. So just like a little kid is learning a first language and they're doing things by trial and error, they're trying to test and verify, second language learners have something in their head called an interlanguage. And the interlanguage is that set of rules that's in your head that isn't set in stone yet. There are still problems with it. So your second language learner, they have some rules that aren't correct, and they're changing those rules as they go along, as they realize and recognize the changes that need to be done with them. So they have errors. Some of these are developmental errors. In other words, they're making mistakes based on what they've learned or what they think they've learned in the language. Some of these are transfer errors. You know, they don't know how to pronounce something properly, and so they take their first language grammar and try to apply it to a second language. That's a transfer error. Developmental error is when they're just making an error in the second language, or in this case, in English. They're not transferring a rule from their first language to the second language. And that's what a transfer error is. Second language learners also have to have a variety of competencies in order to accurately communicate. So, for example, they need linguistic competence. And when I say linguistic competence, I'm actually talking about the structure and rules of the language. In other words, the syntax, the grammar, the pronunciation of the language. But they need to know just more than just the rules of a language. They need to understand how to communicate those rules. They need linguistic competence, yes, but they also need communicative competence, okay? And these are more of the psychological or the social or the multiple meanings that's going on. And these are your BICS. BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. And so BICS is related with one's ability to communicate and to understand things that are said but not necessarily said. So that's what that is. Textual competence is a little larger than just understanding a single idea or a single sentence or a single phrase, but trying to understand the larger elements in a story or in a lecture or in a discussion, understanding the bigger ideas as they go along. And that's what textual competence is. So we start out with low-level things like linguistic, and we're moving up towards your communication skills, understanding the nuances and the interpersonal communication capabilities. Textual now is the larger elements of understanding multiple units or a speech or a story or a conversation. And we move up to pragmatic, which refers to the knowledge of language in a social setting. So pragmatic is, again, as we talked about earlier with the styles, how do I speak in a certain setting and what would be appropriate or not appropriate. Going in again and talking to a police officer or to a judge, you don't walk in and say, hey, yo, what up? It's something that would be inappropriate, okay? Linguistically accurate. I may be able to understand the whole context of what's going on, but there are social rules and mores that go in play there to describe how I should be using all of these things. When someone is learning a second language, all four of these competencies come into play. The linguistic competencies, knowing the basic structures. The communicative competencies, or BICS, which is basic interpersonal communication skills. The textual competencies, understanding the larger discourse slash larger picture within the whole context of the discussion or lecture or reading. Excuse me. And then pragmatic competencies. How to use language in the settings that you're in. For second language learners, there's a lot to learn. We're really, in this class, only going to be covering the first level, which is the linguistic competencies. But second language learners have a lot more to learn. Okay, let's move on to the next slide here. The text then begins to talk about something called global English. I don't know if you guys realize, if you look on page 34 in here, it's an excellent example of all the different kinds of English that are in the world. You have some mainstay groups, places like the United States and Britain, Australia, and maybe some parts of Canada, some parts of India, which would be your mainstay Englishes. But you've got many other places where English is their first language. There are places in Africa and in Europe and even in Asia where language is taught from the very beginning. I had a friend who was from, where was he from? From Nepal, and he spoke Nepali until he got to till he got to first grade, and from first grade he lived at the school, and the only thing that was spoken there was English. And so English is a very popular language throughout the world. In fact, the most popular language spoken in the world is English. Now, the most popular first language happens to be Chinese, but there are so many Chinese who are trying to learn English that if we just asked which one is the most popular of all, it's going to be English. English is what we call today the lingua franca, Lingua-Franca, the lingua franca of languages. Lingua franca is a French word, and it was used years ago. I can't do this too well. Right? And it meant the language that was the common language, language of the people, the most popular language. Whoops, that's supposed to be a C. We'll just do it as an A, I guess, or a K. The lingua franca. And that was the main or popular or the most, the standard language. And today the lingua franca is English. We can all talk about standard American English, but if you're in Britain, it's standard British English. Well, they're also developing a combination, an amalgamation of all these languages called an international English. Kind of like Morse code. It was a way of communicating using letters via sounds, and it was used everywhere, right? And so there is this thing called an international English. Like if you look on page 34, you can see all these Englishes that are here, and is there a need for an international English? Another interesting question, because of some of the things that I've been seeing in the news, is the question about whether the United States needs to create a law to protect and promote the English language. I don't know if you realize this, but did you know that in there was one state who almost voted for German to be their state language? Did you know that? Do you know what state that was? Anybody who does, I will give you some extra credit. The state that almost decided that German was to be their state language. Not every state wanted to do that, and of course now there's this huge influx of Spanish speakers, and some people are curious, are suggesting that we protect the English language by making it a hard and fast rule. Do we need to do that? Do you think we should? Would it be a good idea? Would it help? Webster warns about borrowing words. And why? Well, Webster did not want us to be borrowing so many words because he feared that we would be losing or wasting or perverting the English language. And so we weren't supposed to be borrowing words. And to be honest, in the past we borrowed lots and lots and lots of words. More recently, the words that we are developing and are creating are words that we create by ourselves from research, from science, from technology. Nanotechnology, for example, is just a word that's a new word. Blogosphere is a new word, right? Blogging. These are just new words that have appeared because of technology and our science and that kind of thing. So, whether we should borrow words or not, the truth is we don't do nearly as much as we used to in the past. Most of the words we make are more words that we get from our own creations. Okay, these are the key terms for this chapter. Please make sure that you understand